Welcome to a new video. This time I'm gonna talk a bit about two park visits I just had. Within a short 2-day trip to the Netherlands, I visited Toverland for the very first time and also got back to Walibi Holland. Let me talk a bit about Toverland first. Toverland might not be the largest park, but what it lacks in quantity, it really does make up with its quality. During my visit, the park was quite empty. And while they had quite strict corona rules, I managed to ride a lot. But let me talk about the corona rules first. In the queue line of every attraction, they sectioned the queues with stripes so everyone keeps their distance to one another. A quite unique thing when it comes to boarding coasters is that the ride operators use sticks to check if your restraint is locked. Of course, that does cost a bit of time, but they managed to do it quite well. Other than that, it's like in every other park. In coasters with long trains, every second row has to stay empty. Except of course for Phoenix, the wing coaster, where every single seat can be boarded. Outside of the attractions, the entire park had one-way arrows at most locations. But now let's come to Toverland as a park. This park is great. It's a very beautiful and well-kept park. Every area of the park is really well made. If you want to do an entire lap through the park, that won't take you that long. Because most of the space of the park is taken up only by the attractions. You won't find a lot of main paths. But there are quite a few other smaller routes you can take, and that's also one of the greatest things about this park. On every lap you do through the park, there's always something new to see. One of the sketchiest things here is probably the indoor area. The indoor part contains two sections. One of them is a bit more themed, the other one is a bit more, basic. There aren't really any main attractions in here, except of course the strange but really well made powered bob ride. But let's come to the coasters now. The first thing we rode was Phoenix. I heard a lot of good things about this ride, and it did not disappoint. It sits in a great location and has really good theming, and the ride is quite intense. During our visit, we rode Phoenix a total of 5 times. Like every coaster during our visit, it only had one train ops, which I don't mind because they were able to fill the entire train. I noticed one thing. Phoenix had the slowest operations in the park. The way they dispatched the train to keep distance from the riders wasn't quite the best. But I enjoyed the ride overall. I was able to ride the coaster in the front and the back, on the left and on the right. Let's come to the other coasters now. Booster Bike, the Vekoma motorbike coaster, was down for the entire day, so I didn't get that ride. In the indoor section, the only coaster there is a Vekoma family coaster. It's quite a basic ride and it also had really slow dispatches. One of the most surprising rides was the Whirlwind. This is a Muck-Ride spinning coaster with onboard soundtrack, and from the outside and from the POVs it doesn't look all that interesting. But this ride packs quite a punch. The spin of the ride is quite forceful and it's overall just really fun. I actually rode this coaster an entire 4 times today, because after my first ride, when I wanted to get off the ride, for some reason the ride operator sent out the train again. So it didn't really stop in the station and the restraints didn't open. And let me just say, the ride operator looked quite confused and the entire train was laughing. But let's come to the best ride in the park. Troy, the GCI wooden coaster. After the first two GCIs I rode, Wodan at Europa Park and Mystic Timbers at Kings Island, I didn't have the highest expectations for this ride, but this GCI blew my expectations. I had no idea that a wooden coaster could be this intense. This ride has great pacing, it's not rough, it has very strong laterals and great airtime. And it doesn't really matter if you ride this coaster in the front or in the back, it's great in both. When it comes to theming, the most noticeable thing is of course this massive Trojan horse. It's not in a queue itself, it's just sitting next to the entrance on the pathway. The first half of the queue feels like you're in a botanic garden, it's really well kept and well made. There is also water surrounding good chunks of the queue line where you always can see ducks. A fun fact about these ducks, they always run around on the plaza in front of the ride station and you can come really close to them. They have no fear of the park visitors. And if you see it in a certain way, those ducks are the queue's live actors. While Troy did have faster operations than Phoenix, they fit less people in the train. And with one train ops, the queue didn't move that fast. But except for our first ride, the queue line was always very short. That day, I rode Troy a total of 7 times. I rode it in the very back multiple times, but I didn't get the front row because that day the front row was completely crossed out. You couldn't ride there. I had a blast at this park. We were able to do a lot of things. But let's come to Walibi Holland now. While Toverland was a park I haven't visited before, I have been to Walibi Holland last year. And here I just want to talk about the Corona rules a bit more. Walibi Holland had a ride reservation system. For 6 of the park's 7 coasters, the 2 water rides and the drop towers was this system made for. For all the other rides, you didn't have to reserve your ride. While for most of our visit we were able to reserve without any problems, but in the morning it was horrible. A lot of the park visitors weren't able to reserve their ride. The ride reservation worked with smartphones. You had to select a ride, and then you had to reserve the ride, then you had to wait outside the queue. This is very similar to many parks' fast lane systems. The problem was, in the morning the reservation did not work at all. But once we got the hang of it, it worked quite well. So, on our visit, the queue lines were a bit longer than the ones at Toverland. But waiting outside the queue line also has its benefits. Let's take Goliath for example, when it has a 30-minute queue and you just reserve the ride. And in these 30 minutes you have time to go to the toilet, to eat something, or to do other smaller rides where you don't have to do any reservations. It's not really a bad system if it works properly, but in my opinion they still should do it like the other parks. During our visit we rode Goliath 4 times in the front, in the middle and the back, Untamed 4 times, also in the front, the middle and the back, and Lost Gravity only once. We did some other non-coaster attractions. We did Speed of Sound at Express Park Prime 13 once. Both parks handled the situation well, but in the end, I say that Toverland did it better. Toverland's system is quite basic, but the simplicity is way better than something as confusing or complicated as the system that Walibi Holland has. From what I have heard, Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen also uses this ride reservation systems. I don't know how good that works, but I'm not a fan of it. Do you have any questions about my visits to these parks? What do you think of the systems? Thanks for watching. Bye.